Hey folks, welcome to Code and Concrete, where we share the latest trends and the stories of trailblazers in the built environment. We hope you gain some insight from our wide range of topics such as real estate development and sustainability, or blockchain, artificial intelligence, and data. Joining us today is Robert Orozco, a seasoned software professional with 15 years of experience, including 9 years in data analytics and artificial intelligence. He consults for AI startups and enterprises implementing AI solutions. As the founder of Afirmity, Robert leads efforts to combat deepfakes in corporate and government communications. That's awesome. He's also a co-inventor of a pending patent using artificial intelligence on video footage to generate comprehensive reports. I hope we dive into all that stuff, Robert. Welcome to Code and Concrete.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, I have to admit that when you recommended to me that I do some sort of video content, that was part of the inspiration for this, to actually sit down with people and do long form communication and touch on the 50 different topics that I happen to be engaged in every single day.
Well, I'm glad you chose to do it. I've always thought you were a great communicator, and you and I have always had fantastic conversations. And I think if more of them had been recorded, I think you'd have a lot of content in your hands. So I'm really excited that you're doing these podcast series now.
Well, that's exactly how I feel about it. I talk to people every single day, and I thought, geez, hundreds and hundreds of conversations, high level stuff, or down into the weeds. I need to start recording it, and this is like my opportunity to do it, because even you and I have talked about AI a lot, or the different GPT models and how they're starting to actually think, which is something that doesn't make sense to me still. I understand how it can regurgitate an answer, but thinking that is, can I just ask, so what, right off the bat, what's the difference between the latest GPT model that is thinking and traditional AI, LLMs?
Well, so it's kind of a use of recursion. So LLMs, I'll take one step back. LLMs work with transformer models, and it's basically, think you take up the language you're using, you break it up into little pieces, whether that's a word or like the cant, like the abbreviation N''T, you break it up into little tokens. And then each token is then represented against the value of every other token. And it creates a probability function of what's the most likely next thing to come up. And so when you're going with transformers, you're just thinking like 200,000 by 200,000 different combinations, and it's just the biggest matrix math you could ever imagine. And so what they're doing is saying, okay, well, given the structure of numbers of these values, we know that this formula with this matrix math gives us this is the most likely next word. And so that gives you an initial output, right? It's basically word by word. So every new word they choose, it does the same matrix math again with that one little addition, one little addition, one little addition. That's why when you used to watch ChatGPT, used to go word by word, chunk by chunk. And so now with the newer models, what they're doing is they're taking those outputs and then feeding both the output and the initial input back in. And so it's saying, okay, well, given this is the question they were asking, and this is the answer we proposed, does this answer all the core points? You know what I mean? And it's just a refeeding back into it. What I like to think of it when it comes to like LLMs and AI, it's the short-term memory of the brain. When we're having a conversation, we're kind of just pulling, things quickly. It's not like we're diving deep into our, memory of facts. Being like, oh, on Tuesday, October 18th, I did this. You know what I mean? It's just grabbing that core information. So I think AI is actually going to get a lot more impressive very quickly, because I think they're finally starting to expand to the other portions of the brain. I mean, even if you go back to neural networks are, in software, a representation of how human neurons worked. We came up with it back in the 50s or 60s, I believe. The issue being our computers were literally just not good enough. And we finally hit the point where, thanks to things like gaming and technology innovation, the parallel processing we have on computers is actually capable of doing that kind of math at scale. And that's why we're seeing the explosion of AI now. And so as we build up the additional portions of how our brain works and we feed those into AI systems, from a software sense, we start building out like long-term memory, reference points, comparison tools. You're going to start seeing exponentially more impressive technology coming out of AI.
So I assume that comparison or long-term memory are different portions of the brain that AI could begin to replicate. Are there other human attributes that you think AI is going to evolve into?
I don't know about evolve into. Until it starts designing its own software code, technically we're just improving upon it.
Right.
But the big thing is, like I said, what we don't appreciate as humans is how much data is being fed into our brain at once. Because even if you think of the human eye, it's got about a 7K resolution per eye, and we have two sets of eyes, which give you two sets of video with depth. We have the temperature we're feeling, the audible noises happening around us, what our physical internal temperature is, things like that. And all of that data is happening in us all at once in processing. And so I think one of the things people don't really understand about AI is they type in a really simple message into a box and they expect like the same robust understanding that we have, but it's not good at. It's like, imagine you lived inside of a gray box and you got handed a little sentence from someone and you did the best you could trying to map what they're trying to do. We have the context of it's the morning, it's the evening, it's winter, all those kind of things that it doesn't intuitively have immediately when you're asking that question. And so a lot of context is missed. And so as we start feeding into additional data systems into AI, so like when you're asking your question, it's feeding in all that contextual information as well, pictures, images. Even if you use ChatGPT, the ability to add images into your queries drastically improved usage. The ability to tag a website drastically improved usage. And so as we feed in all of these additional data points when it's trying to do that processing, we're going to keep seeing better results. And I think as we design and build out things that that short-term memory part of our brain doesn't do, but the rest of our brain does, we will get more human-like and more capable AI systems. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. So we have a sensory advantage, which allows us to, how would I describe it? Add another dimension to our understanding of information, although we're still limited on the amount of information we can process. But if we can, and when I said evolve AI, just, evolve it as a concept, but if we can improve upon it so that it begins to take in almost like sensory information or context, as humans would describe it, is that seems to be like the last threshold before artificial intelligence really becomes general, like replicates human general intelligence.
Absolutely. So there's two things that I can talk onto this. One of them is the beauty of the expansion of the IoT kind of world we've gone into in the last probably like 10 years. IoT was a big thing, Internet of Things. It got pushed largely in manufacturing, warehouse, logistics. I know real estate's adopted a lot of it for sensoring technology around smart homes, things like that. And all of those are data points that are now going to be able to be integrated into those kind of AI models. Both using AI models to analyze them and discover insights, but also feeding those data points into requests. So like I wouldn't be very surprised if you have a smart home with the sensoring of like light levels, temperature, all of those things being fed into a home-based LLM smart home that says, okay, well, given the context that it is morning, it is sunny, it is this, you're asking for this thing, I now have better contextual information to answer or deliver what you're asking for. So there's also a fascinating technology. Are you familiar with Isaac Sim?
No, tell us about that.
So that's one of NVIDIA's technologies. It goes around the concept of digital twins. Digital twins the first time I heard of them was from GE, and they were creating digital twins of their, the wind turbines? And they were running these turbines in different locations to simulate how how the wear would go, how the energy would be produced from them. And so now there's something called Isaac Sim, where they're able to effectively create a 3D environment with physics engines, put in robotics, and then have them self-teach themselves scalably across like a million little micro emulated universes, and then learn to do physical tasks in the real world. One of the examples is someone took one of I believe it was a Boston Dynamics dog, those little robots that they
Yeah.
build.
Yeah.
They taught it to balance on a ball and walk forward.
Hmm.
Like, so it's standing on the ball, moving the ball forward, but not falling off the ball. And they trained it purely in Isaac Sim, and then were able to take the physical robot, given that it knew like the controls, if I'm getting these sensor movements, I should do these actions, and then place that robot in the real world on a real like yoga ball, and they were able to get it to balance and do that action. So that's going to be a really big improvement, is when we can start taking some of our robotics tools, producing, this emulated environment, and with IoT data, we can produce even better simulated environments, because now we can compare them more realistically to real world conditions, and then train robots at scale at a speed that we normally couldn't, without having to do any physical development of material.
Right, right. And in some ways, that's a good example of what a human brain does, because we're able to simulate the future and determine whether or not we want to make a decision. What is a possible outcome of that? That's how we learn, right? Our frontal lobe gets better at predicting the outcome of our decisions, and so theoretically, it sounds like computers are going to continue to do this. They can be trained in a much more complex, simulated, virtual environment that is sort of like their brain or a video game, and then replicate that to actually take action in the real world. I mean, that's
Well, you're
the
exactly
more you
right.
talk about it, the more you realize just how much we're almost playing God in the way that we're teaching these robotics or artificial intelligence to operate with the same in the same way as the human brain.
Oh yeah, it is really fascinating. And I have a 9-year-old, right? So I just watched my kid, learn to do some of his tasks a couple of years ago. And so it's interesting, the comparison of like, he thinks it's going to do, I'm trying to throw a ball. If I think I throw it this way, it's going to work. It doesn't. He learns, he tries it again. Computers aren't as efficient as us at doing that. So it takes them like hundreds of hours, where it takes us a few minutes. But the interesting part is that becomes relatively irrelevant when software can parallelize it better. You know, like, you can run a simulation 1,000 times at once,
Right.
whereas we have the one brain running that one simulation. So even if we're more efficient, we will still reach a point where we're slower, purely because there is enough data centers to do it at scale faster than we can. And so that's the really interesting thing we're going to be approaching when it comes to AI. And it's an extraordinarily exponential curve. It's probably getting closer to a logarithmic curve of
Hmm.
improvement. And so I don't think people are ready for it in general. I think they're seeing the technology. It's not as impressive as they expect it to be. And they don't realize that even the way that ChatGPT works, you're giving, a positive rating or a negative rating on the results you're putting out. And that's to training the model. Obviously, unless you have enterprise licensing. But if you're using the free or even some of the initial paid, like ChatGPTs, Anthropics, Geminis, they are using your data to train. So as you're working with these AIs, the responses they're getting out are maybe not what you want, but they're now learning they're not what you want, and are better able to tune the model later to get better results. And so the more people interact with it, the better it's going to get.
So we know what it's like now, and as you described, we're sort of at that curve. We're starting to ideate what it could look like in 5 years. Let's go back 15 years when you were first exposed to this. First, let's unpack how did you get into uh, computer science, data analytics? I would think you described yourself as a data scientist in some ways. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
how have you seen this change over the decade and a half?
So, yeah, so I got into software, ironically, not as a traditional career. I was doing currency trading as a hobby. And so I was building out like trading systems and algorithmic trading patterns for myself. And it simply got to the point where I couldn't efficiently do that with like the traditional technologies, Excel, Access. The data I was trying to analyze was just too slow. So I got into SQL, and then I got into, little applications that could interact with my SQL server. And that's how I got into software to begin with. So my uh, going into software has always been around data. It's always been around automation, and has always been around like systems-based decision making. So like I don't want to be present all the time to make trades. I want a robot to do it.
Sure.
And so I was coding bots to try to replicate my trading patterns. And that's what got me into software development. And I found a real passion in it. And so I was moving towards careers. I'd had a business prior. We did a brokeraging of hardware components, point of sale terminals, office computers, things like that. But it's hardware, and hardware isn't scalable the same way software was. And so I found that interest in software development and used it kind of as a jumping off point to a career in software development. Like I said, this about 15 years ago. I've been an app developer, I've been a DBA, a solutions architect, and then most recently has been a data engineer and data scientist. So, and when it comes to AI basically didn't exist when I started working on any of this. The closest we had was the most simplistic machine learning algorithms you can imagine, and those are entirely different. I think people have kind of blended them from a business lingo perspective to try to sell software better, but it is a very different beast. Machine learning is simple, like regression algorithms. Like here's a linear regression algorithm that we tune the underlying factors after we've done our regression. Or even if you're doing some like LSTMs, long-term analysis models. But when it comes to AI, that is a whole different kind of math and a whole different set of data structures that get very different results. AI actually didn't really come back, I wouldn't say, until I believe it was the 2014, maybe 2013 ImageNet competition. I don't know if you're familiar with any of this. But there's always been a competition called ImageNet, where people were building software to detect things in images, right? This is a cat, this is a dog, etc. And in about 2013, a team introduced a neural net to do it. And it had a significant improvement over the others. I think the success rate was like a 60% at the time, and they jumped it to like the mid 70s. So they like blew everyone out of the competition. And so everyone's like, whoa, what is this thing that we're not using? And so that was kind of the reintroduction of neural nets. And really, again, it's only because hardware's gotten as good as it is. It's one of the same reasons that Python, the programming language, has become as popular as it is today. It wasn't when I started doing software development, because it used to be Python was an extraordinarily slower language. And that mattered when it was like a minute for C# and 10 minutes for Python. But now it's a second for C# and 10 seconds for Python, and no one cares. You know what I mean? So it's really, we have the advantage of living in a time where hardware is just so much better. There's also been some great advances. There was a team out of Stanford. When Google DeepMind launched, they spent about $5.5 million on this data center for Google DeepMind. And it was supposed to be this big, impressive investment. And what ended up happening was a group out of Stanford realized that you could do the same level of parallelized processing with graphics cards. And so they built a machine that could do the same computational power of Google's DeepMind $5 million data center with $70,000 of graphics cards. And that caused a mad rush into the whole graphics card, NVIDIA interest, because people realized, wow, we can just use parallelized processing, which these graphics cards have been designed to do all this math that we have to do. They're already kind of perfectly designed for the parallelized math that we're trying to do. And now we can get way better results for way less cost. And so that was also the big explosion of machine learning and AI, was now the technology exists.
So how do you see the correlation between the hardware and what we're trying to do with artificial intelligence? Do you think it's a limiting factor at this point? We don't have enough data centers. We don't have enough chip production?
100%.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if we don't have enough, but we're finally getting, part of the reason NVIDIA exploded in value, and I was lucky enough to call that. I have a few friends who made a lot of money, and now they're a bigger fan of mine and asked my opinion on AI stuff. Because they had I believe it was the 2023 GTC conference from NVIDIA, where they announced their big push for AI cloud infrastructure. And I always am a big supporter of selling shovels during a gold rush. And so it really comes to computational power. Part of the reason that AI is so expensive right now is because things are computationally expensive. But computation keeps getting better. We're not exactly following Moore's law anymore when it comes to the cost to computation. or the number of transistors in a small size of a processor. But we're going to keep going. And now there's also a whole new world of things like organoids, and we're going to get quantum computing, which is a whole other beast. Currently, quantum computers can't really do the same kind of mathematical processes that we use in our general computers. So that's not as big of a concern or value add right now. But organoids are an interesting thing. Are you familiar with those? I can go really sci-fi and dystopian on it if you want.
Let's define organoids. What are these?
Organoids are literal human brain cells that they're growing to do computation on. It exists. It is already put in practice. You can actually go online right now, and there is a set of organoid computation tools that you can rent time on right now. So they're basically bioengineering neuron cells because they process data. Like I said, the human brain's grossly more efficient than hardware. The only advantage hardware has is scalability. But now they're literally trying to bioengineer organic computers to do processing on. So that's a whole interesting world that's going to intersect with AI probably in 5 to 7 years. So,
And I presume it's the speed at which our synapses can fire that surpasses what hardware can do. I see.
Yes. Well, and just the natural, like we're replicating organic action on software, so there's always a limiting factor. You know, you're just doing extra work. It's not built to just do this one process. It's but yeah, it's a little dystopian. I think it's a really interesting thing that we're even at that point. But computation is absolutely, getting back to your question. Sorry, computation is absolutely a limiting factor for AI. Part of the reason our models have that like memory window, the context window as they talk about, is think of it like a TV. How it's the one more inch on a TV is more expensive because it's all the additional square footage of the screen cost. It's the same thing with AI because it's multidimensional matrices. So even one little context point we add onto this window is now 250,000 times by another 250,000 times. So as we try to make it longer in terms of the time window, it gets exponentially more expensive to compute. And so as we get these better and better chips, better and better technologies, the cost to process AI and the window of capacity we will have for AI will expand.
I see. Well, I want to tie it in. I want to, add a layer to that question by referencing the shirt that you're wearing, which is Generac.
Yes.
One, how'd you get the shirt? And two, what's the relationship between the United States or global energy production and the consumption that we're anticipating from all of this computation? How are you seeing that play into things?
So, well, I used to work at Generac. I don't anymore. I used to build out the internal reporting for the remote gens. So Generac has a whole series of IoT, basically, gens that are out there, and you can do things like check fuel levels, check performance, and they're also folding in an integration where eventually, as power costs move throughout the day, as you'd be able to basically schedule your gens to run at peak times to generate almost revenue for yourself in your house. So that's one of the interesting things we're doing. That's like almost a grid-scaled micro energy supply system that they're trying to build. But realistically, no matter what we do from an energy perspective, we're most likely going to be having to move towards like a nuclear power. And so that's one of the big things I've been advocating for the last about 2 years. And we've seen talks about it, whether it's Satya Nadella or Sam Altman. They both talked about the need and resurgence of nuclear power to power all these data centers they're trying to build. I think Microsoft is investing $100 billion in data centers, including the one they're building here in Wisconsin.
Well, it's good to see people talking about nuclear. I've always been an advocate for that. But there's a clear competition between existing infrastructure, which heavily relies on the grid, and it's already insufficient. And then you have this added layer of the amount of computation we're trying to roll out fundamentally, to offer these services to people and companies and infuse it into our buildings by the means of IoT. I mean, that expectation is beyond, I don't want to say it's beyond what we anticipated, because we've been saying for a while that we knew this was going to be exponential. And I was talking to Dr. Dennis Hill about this, where couldn't anyone have predicted that we need more energy, especially as we become a more computer-dependent society? But I would argue that some countries do recognize that, and they are doubling down on their energy production capacity. I think that's happening a lot in East Asia, China in particular. And there's a lot less debate over how you roll out the infrastructure developments or the developments or production of the technology. They just do it, whereas in the US, we're still just talking about it, and then we politicize it, and it just holds us back. And the rest of the world is making huge advancements.
I agree. Well, I 100% agree that the United States is very politicized when it comes to energy. There's basically the two camps of green energy versus fossil fuels, and there's not a lot of spending on core infrastructure that we really need. One of the advantages other nations like China have had is when you're building new, it's easy to build the best for what's new. The challenge we come into America is a lot of our infrastructure is just old, and so it's retrofitting. You know what I mean? It's a lot harder to retrofit than it is to build new, and we're not quite there. Although I do think that we will see an improvement of the electricity infrastructure as these additional data centers come online. If we do start moving towards nuclear, and I think the cultural zeitgeist of nuclear has become more welcoming. I don't think it was even 10 years ago, but there's been a lot of advances in nuclear power, especially micronuclear facilities. There's a great company, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but what they're building is micro reactors, and they're using electromaglev systems so that if there were to, say, be a power outage, it will automatically drop the rods into the cooling cores to help prevent, obviously Chernobyl style incidents. We haven't, a lot of people kind of forget that was how many years ago, decades ago?
Right.
So a lot of the technology is advanced, and because we haven't seen it put into practice, we still think the archaic nuclear technology is what we have, but it's not. So I think that we're going to see just forced development from the AI systems, and that will parlay into a more general cultural acceptance of these technologies, and then move towards a better infrastructure rollout in the United States, especially if we're trying to do anything with EVs. I know there's a lot of issues with people trying to do commercial level EV facilities, and the power systems, like the grids where they're trying to build them, just aren't capable of it.
Right. That's the other angle. We want to push all the cars to become electric, but no one's talking about, well, how do we upgrade the grid in order to do that? We have all these ambitions, but then we were never asking the question, okay, what infrastructure do we need in place to actually enable this utopian vision? And then when you do try to roll it out, it just becomes a political debate whether, well, this is part of an authoritarian plan, or this is about the climate, when it's really just about efficiency, or vice versa. And it just doesn't move anywhere. But I'm glad that you brought up EVs, because that's a great example. And I would want to say that human error played a considerable role in the Chernobyl meltdown. And so as you start to delegate a lot of responsibilities to perhaps computers, and relying on IoT to accurately sense this stuff, and then have some sort of programmable elements in there, like you had just mentioned, where these rods deploy automatically to prevent any sort of issues. I guess we just don't talk about it for whatever reason. But if people recognize that, there'd be a lot more advocacy for that, and then that would enable what seems to be the next stage of computation, where that exponential growth starts to become unlocked.
I agree. I think it's really just going to be forced. The initial ones will be forced because of the data centers, the rampant use of AI everywhere. We're just going to need more power, and so there will forcefully implement some power systems. And then once people realize that it's not as scary or dangerous as they have the cultural zeitgeist has advocated for it to be, people will become more accepting of it because it is the best alternative we have to fossil fuels and emissions. And the issue with green energy is we just don't have grid level storage necessary for the inconsistency of green energy. Like it'd be great if everything could run off solar panels and wind turbines, but the sun, rises and falls, and wind isn't always blowing. And so unless we got to a more capable energy storage system for grids, we're not going to be able to fully leverage green energy. So moving towards nuclear, where you can run it 24/7, there's very little waste nowadays. It's a lot more efficient. I think is the smartest move for us as people.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about green energy here at Building because you had mentioned earlier microgrids, which reminds me of decentralized physical infrastructure, DePIN, and what people are trying to do with essentially turning, it could be generators or it could be solar panels, into a revenue stream based off of what they have there at home. Or in a commercial building, it might be equipped with solar panels, and then they could facilitate the trade of that energy. But there's that infrastructure component where you have to collect, store, and then deliver that energy. And while most transformers are dual, bidirectional, you still have just a level of friction there that doesn't make it quite cost efficient. But I think it's a great idea, or at least another utopian vision. So if we're going to talk about decentralization, obviously blockchain plays a role in that. I want to segue to that. What was your first exposure to blockchain?
So I was exposed to blockchain very early. I have a great former business partner named Benjamin Kaufman. He got into crypto like Bitcoin, Litecoin when they were, I think, probably $23 to $24 a coin. So he wasn't like the first, but he was extraordinarily early on it. I remember a point where he would mine a Bitcoin and a Litecoin a day, and they were probably less than $100. And so he was very fortunate. One of the biggest blunders of my business life was he proposed us going and getting a business loan for a bunch of graphics cards and getting a server farm and then just mining crypto. And I didn't. I should have. I think, yeah, I would have probably been able to be retired by now. And so that was probably my biggest blunder. But because of it, I've always had like a general knowledge of blockchain technology. And it's an extraordinarily impressive technology because it's the safest database that will ever exist. Like there's no better way to think about it than that. It is, a lot of databases can be hacked. You can run a SQL server on a server and you can hack the underlying database. A blockchain, because of its nature of being decentralized, and then everyone looking at it at once with that established ledger, makes it the most trustable software system we can ever have. And so that's why I think it's so effective. Ironically, I think that's part of the reason some people have been slow to implement it, because I think some people like to be loosey-goosey on certain things that they shouldn't.
Absolutely.
And that I think there's ironically a hesitance, not because blockchain isn't capable, but because blockchain's so good that they wouldn't be able to get away with small changes that they do get away with on certain systems. But I think blockchain is here to stay. It's got more and more uses. And as we enter into this AI realm, it will be critical for trust. Because as you know, I have my startup, Afirmity, which is trying to combat deepfakes, which is one of the many arms of the octopus that is AI. And we're going to have software that can, at scale, replicate things and present fake information. And so having blockchains and ledgers and traceability is going to be absolutely critical for trust in the world we're entering into.
Absolutely. So let's touch on this. You're certainly a visionary in this area. You saw that these technologies were going to intersect. You used the knowledge that you had in both of them. And then you said, well, you know what? I think one can actually resolve issues that the other is going to create, being AI in that case. How did you first recognize that? What was it like to actually start developing that? And how does it feel now seeing the the level to which AI and deepfakes can actually mimic people, and it's starting to confuse people online. Like there's certainly a misinformation problem, and there's videos and generators out there that I actually I can't tell the difference. I think Google just released something that they were essentially vloggers. They were replicating vloggers, and I couldn't tell that it was fake. And that would be damning to not just older generations, but even people like me who are digitally native, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
walk us through that story.
Well, so I've been involved in AI. I've long been advocating for it. Funny enough, everyone thought I was crazy or dumb because I used to say like AI is going to be this impressive, it's going to be able to do this, and everyone thought I was nuts. And ChatGPT 3 was the most how do I put it? It gave me the most validation that has ever happened. Because everyone who thought I was crazy talking about AI is finally like, oh, it actually is capable of doing some of the things you said. Maybe I should start asking your opinion on it. It's kind of partly me into my modern consulting work. But I was, of all the vectors that AI can do, the ability to use it for better translation, to formulate and summarize documents, to gain new insights. The one thing I think is a net negative is deepfakes. That has been a huge concern for me because every other aspect of AI has negatives, but there are more positive than negatives. Whereas deepfakes are just more negatives. There's very few positive uses of deepfakes. I think one of the only ethical uses of deepfakes I've seen is the ability, whereas if you were to take this podcast, there's a tool that lets us turn it into a different language, and we'll dub our voices and deepfake our mouths to move towards that other language to make it, more accessible across different languages. That's a great use. That's legitimate for deepfakes. But really, it's all malicious. And so it's a problem that I've been trying to think about for a very long time. Most of them are responsive, right? The problem has already happened. I've already made a fake of you. Information's already happened. You're now exposed. How do we catch it? And I'm not a huge fan of responsive. I like to be preemptive. The issue being with responsive is it's basically virus antivirus. You can build the best detector in the world. Someone's going to make a new model. That detector is not going to be as good. Just like someone writes a new computer virus, your antivirus software doesn't catch it because it's brand new. Eventually they catch it and then proliferate that information. But it's a constant war. And fake information can be very impactful. I mean, during the beginning of the Ukraine war, people made a deep fake of Zelensky saying that, telling his soldiers to put down their arms, which, in a conflict zone, causing that kind of chaos could be actual death to people. And so for me, it was like, how do you establish what is trustable media? And so obviously blockchain came to mind. It's the most trustable storage of information. And so, I was thinking of trying different ways to do it. A lot of people use hashing of documents, and then, you create that watermark. And hash works great for applications, don't get me wrong. I want to make sure the application I'm downloading is the exact one that I downloaded. But when it comes to digital media, every crop, trim, cut, edit, recolor, change audio, that will change an audio file. So using things like hashing, to me, wasn't good enough. And so that's why I was kind of mulling it over, and I was made aware of a blockchain tech that allowed you to store data at a better scale. And that was kind of the birth of Afirmity. So what we're able to do is we can store full raw video files onto blockchain and then serve them back out on call. So, you can go to any little browser, go to a link, which goes to a smart contract, which reassembles the media from blockchain so that you can watch it like it's YouTube. One of the issues that I've always had with hashing with traditional blockchains was there is a technical skill level needed for doing that. I can't tell my grandma, download the video, go get the hash, do a hash comparison. Now you know it's true.
Right.
Nobody's doing that. You know what I mean? So what we wanted to create was an accessible technology for people to use that was leveraging blockchain for trust in this world of fake content. And one of the other weird intersections we're having is, AI is used to make fake content, but there are legitimate people using AI to make authentic content. We saw the Toys R Us video rebrand from the official company who owns the Toys R Us brand, and they made a fully AI-based commercial. And so you have a detector, it says it's AI, but that doesn't mean it's not trustworthy. You know what I mean? There's a really awkward gray area that comes into. It's like, it's authentic messaging, it's from the brand, it's what they want to say, but they used AI for this. There was actually even an incident in the UK where one of the candidates used an AI upscaler for his image, and they recolored his tie with AI. And then people used an AI detector, saw that his image had a high chance of AI with it, and then claimed he was a fake candidate that didn't exist. Like, there were actual news articles like of people saying, like, this isn't a real person. This isn't a fake AI candidate. And he was a real person. He just used AI to upscale his image for better resolution for his internet graphics. So it's going to be a very interesting world. And the amount of information that's going to be coming out is going to be faster than we can ever imagine. Because now it's not just, you and me creating content like this podcast, but it's going to be, I'm going to run 100 AI bots creating fake content all at once. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's going to be interesting.
It feeds into the dead internet theory, which is devastating, and I mean, it really waters down genuine content and conversations such as we're producing here, where we are two real individuals having a good conversation, but it could be, mimicked or faked by a fake Robert and a fake Matthew that are having some sort of gibberish conversation, or at least something that doesn't have quite as much substance. And I don't know how you get people in an emerging attention economy to determine which one is really of value.
I said I think it will literally have to be blockchain, because it's the only trustable thing. Being able to trace back the creation, generation, is this from an authentic source? Can we can we take this video and validate that it's the same as the official content on on Afirmity page? I think we're going to do that, and that's why we've been pushing towards it. My biggest scare when it comes to it is, imagine you're sitting in a courtroom one day and you're watching a video of you committing a crime you never did.
Right.
That's a very scary world that we're already entering into. There's a Supreme Court judge in the Fifth Circuit he's a big advocate for being involved in AI technologies, blockchain technologies, for the purpose of, like, hey, we're going to have a lot of fake evidence entering our courts soon. That's a very dangerous thing. I don't think anyone wants that world, and so we need to work towards securing it. And like I said, luckily for us, we have blockchain technologies, we have IoT devices, and I think as we formulate, these infrastructure technologies, we're going to have better traceability for what's actually happening in the real world versus the fictitious content being created.
If you had a guess, how soon are governments and corporations going to try to implement safeguards? Or do you think that they will wait until they're compromised and the technology is used against them in a truly damning way? Because right now you can scroll Instagram and see fake AI images of the presidents, or perhaps they were playing Minecraft together, and that's not necessarily detrimental. But at some point, like you said, it could land someone in a courtroom. Especially, I saw a fabricated police body cam footage, and I had to watch it 6 or 7 times before I realized, there's cars parked on the sidewalk, and there's errors with some of the branches in the trees, before I realized, that's not real. But otherwise, I mean, it's going to put people behind bars, and it's already here. So you would think they're taking action now, but I mean, what does that future look like?
It's a really hard thing to do, especially in the United States, because of our First Amendment. There is a big challenge of whether you can actually limit the use of AI. Also, the big problem is it's open source. I had this joke for a while. It's Pandora's box isn't just open, it's open source. This software is out and free to use for anyone. You can download deepfake tools right now. There's an app on GitHub called Wave to Lip where I can take an audio clip, I can take your video, and I can make your mouth move to look like it was saying whatever I want you to say. That's free. And there is malicious uses, and you could theoretically sue for that one instance, but they can't easily hinder people from access to this tool because of the First Amendment. You know, there's luckily been some legislation out, I believe in Pennsylvania and a couple other states, around creating things like CSAM with deepfakes. But even then, there's like legal hurdles they have to work around. There's a lot of, ways they have to tailor the language for those bills to pass. And the challenge with it is this is a really important tool that will drastically change the world economy. The first people to AGI will have an economic force that is unstoppable. And so it is a balance between being first and being safe. The fastest cars in the world are still extraordinarily dangerous as safe as we try to make them. You know what I mean? And now we're actually in a race with China, with India, in AI development in Russia. So right now it's a really interesting battle. Like we've already run into some issues where they've had to add regulations, like the original ChatGPT used for hacking 0-day vulnerabilities in software or creating drugs. And you can still get around some of those workarounds. Like if you want to create a legal document, they try to say like, I don't formulate legal documents. But then if you say, hey, I'm writing a script for a show, the lawyer is drafting this legal document for this purpose, can you make me a legal document that would be in this show that would give the circumstances, and it will do it.
Right.
So there's still workarounds. It's just very hard, and it's open source. So even if they push, watermarking and tracking technologies, I can download the repo. I can remove those tracking from my version of the application. I can run the application. So it is a dangerous tool that a lot of people have access to.
And there's no really great way to limit that access.
It's out. We already opened up Pandora's box, and there's no way to come back.
And like you said, we may not want to limit the access because there is the rare but impactful chance that someone uses it super productively and it helps us in an innovative and progressive way.
Well, there's a huge opportunity for that. When I think of AI, there are two fronts to AI, right? You're either advancing the underlying AI technology in innovation, which is great, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, etc. But unless you're one of those companies with massive data and massive data centers, you're most likely not going to be able to produce your own specialty model that's significantly better, right? Unless you're part of a research organization, you have some sort of proprietary data or a new design technique. But there is a whole separate area for AI, which is now that these tools exist, there's a huge opportunity for business people or startups or founders to now take these new tools and apply them in ways that they've never been able to be used before. One great example would be a lot of people like to either get suggested an online survey, like do a survey, get a free sandwich from your local burger chain.
Yep.
Well, one of the things is a lot of them are all, multi-choice. It's like I highly agree, I disagree, etc., etc. The reason is because we couldn't interpret information. With AI, we're now able to take actual open text surveys where it doesn't take someone reading everyone's paragraphs and understanding it. You can now stick an LLM on hundreds to thousands of open text survey responses and get an organized set of data. The best value of AI is it takes disorderly, unstructured data and can formulate it to structured data. So that's a great use case for it. You have generation techniques. We have Suno AI lets you generate music from a text prompt. So eventually we'll have a world where we don't even have as many musicians because, instead of looking on Spotify, every second I can generate new songs that have never been heard before. They're perfectly tailored to my interests, And so there's a whole industry of people who are now able to leverage these technologies. I work with a few of them. One would be Minder out of California. they are a universal IoT device. So it's a brilliant business model, to be honest. Instead of having like specialty sensors, they produce one little sensor device that covers a range of different things: light levels, humidities, moisture, conductivity, movement, etc. And they help use AI for analyzing your data at scale. They help use AI for developing your workflows automatically. They're one of their big things is real estate. Actually, is they're basically producing a great universal IoT device for people. So if you're doing property management, you want to track things about a location without having to retrofit, an existing building. You say you just bought one. You can deploy their devices, collect all this data, and help use AI to analyze all this unstructured data into actual structured, insights. The company I'm working with for Ready Report, they're doing the AI-based video reporting, the video reporting. So what they're trying to do is analyze body camera footage using AI, analyzing the frames, the objects, the movements, the actions, and help draft police reports. The great thing for that is, as software, you don't have the bias that an individual perspective will have.
Right.
So the AI is now able to see something, just the camera, has no no biases towards any of the individuals, didn't have their heart racing in a dangerous situation, and it's able to analyze this and formulate a description of the event in the police report that is highly detailed, not biased, and it does it in very little time, where now the officer just has to review it, make any small changes that they may want to, but now most of their work is done, and officers can do work that's important, being out there helping communities.
Right.
So the big thing is going to be how we deploy AI. Now that we have this tool, who's effectively leveraging it in these industries?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I mean, that's its own philosophical question, but I want to ask an easier question. So we've talked about structured data on past episodes, but just to help people and new listeners again, what does unstructured data look like out in the world and in its current environments? How are we collecting that? What does it mean to structure that? And what is the output?
Okay. Well, one of the easiest, it's semi-structured, but if you're trying to uniformly connect IoT data, it's technically structured in the sense like it's a data value and a JSON call, and you have this here's the insights. The issue being is when you're trying to connect those insights, we don't want to have to map all those individually or figure out patterns between them. If you were to just grab, a selection of web articles, that's all unstructured data because it's not in a formalized format that is easy to read across all web pages. Not all web pages are formatted the same. Not all that's captured. You could have tons of pictures that you don't know exactly what's in the pictures, and so that's technically unstructured data because we take a trip. Here's all the pictures you took. And now AI can analyze them and categorize them to indoor pictures, outdoor pictures, pictures of animals, pictures on the beach, and help flag and tag all of those pieces of information. Basically, anything not in a database can really be considered unstructured data, and can you bring all those together? And AI allows you to do that at a better scale. Does that make sense? Did I answer kind of the question you had?
Yeah, so if we were to use an example of something, let's use a real estate example to paint a picture for listeners. Maybe unstructured data could exist. Let's say financial data. What would be unstructured financial data, and how do we structure that?
Well, if you're doing maintenance on a property and you're collecting all of the individualized, maintenance costs, unless you have them all in one system, which not a lot of businesses do have good unified systems for management. Mm-hmm. You could take all of those, different receipts, and they could automatically categorize them through images. That was one of the earlier technologies that QuickBooks produced, which was a AI-based tool that could scan receipts, automatically grab that receipt data and formalize it into your QuickBooks instance. And now, you can take all the incidents. You can say, okay, well, we spent all this money. Well, I'm going to take all that data and I'm going to analyze, okay, what categories of problems do I have? Do I have most of my problems in plumbing? Are they most in, something I need an electrician for? Is it HVAC? You could take all of the records of your multi-unit property's garage door opening and say, okay, well, where are high traffic times for people? And then tailor things around those. Like if we're hiring snow removal companies, we know that the largest movement of our renters coming out of the property is between this time window. So we need to make sure that they're there removing snow from the driveway before that time. Things like that. And so with AI tools, you can now take huge portions of this data, throw them into one little spot, and have AI do a huge amount of analysis and drive a lot of insights. Whereas it used to take a data engineer would have to, okay, well, this is from here, this is from there. Let me write this code, convert it to this, convert it to a unified format, create a data warehouse, as we called them. But now it's much easier to do that from a general user perspective. You don't need the engineering to bring it to a unified form to do analysis on it. You can use AI tools to, from the unstructured data, bring it to a unified form itself, and then derive insights from there.
Well, that's a good example. I like the snow removal, so that's great. And there's dozens of examples like that, and people are going to keep finding more creative ways to deploy that technology in real estate or other industries. I mean, smart cities, that's sort of what that concept is. You've got all this information about cities, and then to structure that and to improve the essentially the operational efficiency of a city, or tailor it to human behavior and make it more friendly in that way. So as we reach, the end of the episode, I want to ask just a little bit about startup life. You're a startup founder with bleeding edge technology, which can be a little difficult to pitch.
Yes.
What's something that you've learned from the startup journey, and talking about this technology, and what's a piece of advice that you would reciprocate to other founders in the field?
Being ahead of the curve is a big challenge. When we first started pitching Afirmity to investors, we had to explain what deepfakes were. And so it was so non-existent of a problem when we started addressing it. We started in December of 2022. So we're going on 2 years now. And so for the first 6 to 9 months, no one even knew what deepfakes were. So our pitches were pretty unwelcome, like unreceived. And then suddenly, in the start of 2023 is where everyone started realizing, the beginning of this year, 2024, it had been established enough of a problem, especially with the elections, that it was something that people needed to actually pay attention to and address. And so now we're much more received. But I think from a founder's perspective, there's two-pronged. One, like I said, there's now a new, better tool that is able to be implemented in a bunch of old verticals that can have a huge value driver. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for founders to find ways that AI can be used. I think we've kind of seen the silly little marketing gimmicks of AI, and that was the biggest push. But there's a lot of genuine high-value use cases. I think there was a guy who started teaching classes to older business people who used Excel and taught them how to leverage AI to generate some of those SQL or some of the Excel expressions quicker. So they weren't having to figure out how their Excel document worked. They could just, he was teaching them purely to load it into AI and how to get it to get those things done for it. And the second prong to this is you have to be quick, because AI is happening quick. And it's very important to be implementing it now, because the issue being is because of the speed at which it improves, if you wait until it's good enough to be good to start implementing, then when it is good, those who already implemented it will be worlds ahead of you. Because the scalability you can get from AI is crazy. We've seen a number of businesses that are just not hiring new people because they don't need to, because AI allows them to act as if they have an additional 10, 20% headcount,
right,
which is massive.
Right.
The one caveat I can't not tell everyone this, because this is a very important thing with anyone who wants to do with anything with AI. It is very important to care about data privacy and data retention and use policies. I know a lot of people who have been using it for business, but not using an enterprise license, and that's a huge concern because unless you explicitly have enterprise licensing or have do not use my data for training, there is a potential that any of the intellectual property you're creating, using, or expressing in your prompts will be used to train models, which will increase the likelihood of that AI suggesting it in the future when people are using it. So data privacy and data usage is a critical thing. It's funny, I never have salespeople ignore me, but every time someone comes with an AI tool and they try to hit me up on LinkedIn, I'll always respond, I'm interested in your product. I'm concerned about intellectual property and proprietary data usage. Can you give me a rundown of your data retention and training policies? And I think 9 out of 10 sales reps will then entirely ghost me, which is very concerning because I think it really puts a point on that. A lot of the AI technology companies that are coming around want your data. And if they have your data in a way that is not appropriately licensed, there is a high chance that your data will be exposed in the future to non-internal people. So
Yeah.
I have to mention that. That's a big thing.
Those are great points. I wish that I had brought it up earlier because you can't talk about AI without data and data privacy. And this is something that's been important to us at Building because you have a lot of intellectual property revolving around building practices, architectural engineering designs, how that property is being owned and operated. And of course, if those things are being done well, we want other people to replicate it, but it needs to be done properly and perhaps with monetization or securing, privacy, especially of different stakeholders, right? And this is why real estate has been so opaque, because if you find an edge in the market to generate alpha, you want to hold on to that and you don't want other companies utilizing it. Now you add in the AI elements and databases and data rooms, and if it's not done with great care, it can compromise that real estate company. So it's fantastic that you brought that up because I think a lot of people are willing to just contribute information and they don't realize that it could jeopardize them in the future. Or can we guarantee that all the information that's being used to train these models is perfect, and ensuring that we're not being influenced by bias on our, decisions.
Well, and one of the other things that's important is anything around NDAs. If you're using AI to analyze any documents that you're reviewing that you're under an NDA, you're technically violating that NDA unless you have an enterprise license. That's a big legal gap that I don't think a lot of people realize. I do a lot of consulting, so everything I do, I scour the terms of service for all of these AI tools before I use anything. I actually even avoid a lot of the AI summarization tools for meetings because a lot of them have they can use your data for training. It's well, okay, that's concerning when I'm having a meeting about some R&D project we're working on.
Right.
So those are big things that I think companies aren't well aware of. And yeah, I wish I brought it up earlier when we were talking about the restrictions and security around AI. But it's a big focus point that I think matters. That's why I wanted to bring it up before we concluded. And then you great example with the data rooms and proprietary information for real estate. You don't want all your information public. So making sure that when you're utilizing these tools, you're doing it in a way that is appropriate and safe is absolutely critical. I know it's been a big focus for your startup. So
yeah, and other industries as well. I think healthcare would be the number one area. So far we can barely even keep tabs on our genetic information. People will go research their background and then it will be leaked. What's going to happen when it's actually real time and you have highly detailed blood panels and all this information or medical records. And then you have to ask, how might health insurance companies use AI to read information about me or in aggregate, and then how does that influence rates? I mean, there's just so many questions that people aren't necessarily asking, but someone is going to ask them probably on the wrong side of the aisle, because there's going to be a lot of money to be made, and then people will be pretty upset.
Well, we've already seen some issues like that. The United Healthcare issue, where they had implemented an AI tool for claim denial and had a 90% failure, like inaccuracy rating.
Yeah, and I believe that was partially why their denials skyrocketed. I think they went from a couple percentage points to like 30%, and you can see the fallout, whether it's a person's life or societally, because now everyone's talking about health insurance, what that does. So I guess that was really short-sighted on the implementation of that AI tool.
No, absolutely. Like I said, I will say it is a work in progress. I'm not going to pretend like AI is a magical thing that can do everything. But I think with what the pace of improvement we've seen is faster than any technological development I've ever been a part of. I've never seen a quality of technology improve at the pace of AI, and it keeps getting better. I really think that we're going to buttress up against the problem of computation before we buttress up against the problem of the underlying technology itself. And so as we build more data centers, more nuclear plants, expand the volume of these transformers and LLMs, I think we'll see crazy accomplished AI. I mean, I think it's O3 is ChatGPT's new one they're going to be launching, and it's ranked one of the best in the world at coding. So, yeah, I do think it will spawn what I've been calling the idea man economy. I think we're going to probably have like 5 to 7 years of every idea man who's not had the money or technical skill to deploy an idea will now have affordable enough AI tools where you can go from idea to deployment by yourself very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we see the same thing in real estate, and this is what we talk about with the intelligent portfolio platform that we talk about, the ability for solo operators to scale their assets under management. And this would apply to a startup as well, where a solo founder's ability to scale the company because they've delegated typical executive roles to artificial intelligence. I mean, it's very probable. Maybe it was you who mentioned that someone's predicting, there's going to be a unicorn by a solo founder, maybe a one-man band in the near future. It's pretty likely.
I can see that. I've done some very quick things with AI. Like I have a good friend named Jacob, and we were building a little project app. He and I do coding projects together, and we built a mobile app that functioned on a language neither of us have ever used in less than 6 hours, modifying only 4 lines of code ourselves. I just want to see how far AI could get, but it did the UI, the back end, got it functioning on the app. We only had to do 4 lines of code, and that was about the way it was trying to point to the database or the data store. We had to fix that, and that was 4 lines. And otherwise, the entire app works. It's not the prettiest, but it works, and we did it in 6 hours. So we're entering a great time for entrepreneurs.
Certainly. Well, Robert, where can people reach you? What's the best way to learn, more about you and your startup? And if there was a company out there that wanted to consult with you, how would they facilitate that?
Well, if you want to check out our website, Afirmity.com, currently it's a landing page. We're doing a pilot project, so we're only taking interested emails for right now. You can find it at Afirmity.com. My LinkedIn, Robert Orozco. I don't have as much of a social media presence as you. I have to work on that. It's a skill I've always been envious of you for. So,
well, thank you, and I will have those links in the show notes for all the listeners.
Wonderful. Thank you, man. I thank you for having me out here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more question: are you guys planning on raising a round anytime soon?
Not currently, actually.
Okay.
Um, we have we have a we had a decent capital injection. We have a pilot project going, and I know some people in the Trump admin. So we're going to be seeing if we can progress anything forward after January.
Okay. Well, that's huge. Well, let me rephrase the question. If I were to give you a call to action, how do you want people to engage you, and who should?
I love talking to anyone around the topic of AI. It's been a passion for me. It's a reason I was doing it 6 years before ChatGPT 3. Anyone in the business sector, I do a lot of different consulting. So if you have an organization that is looking to do an AI implementation and you just want to get a quick overview, I'm happy to review different business use cases, give an accurate assessment of how these tools work, not just the sales pitch of them. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I did a talk at one of your conferences, and I also spoke on the ICP-CC Community Conference earlier this year. That's the Internet Computer Protocol Community Conference, on the topic of AI and blockchain as well. So you can probably find me there.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Robert, I mean, this has been a phenomenal technical conversation, and I think it should be really eye-opening to a lot of our listeners. And I want to thank everyone who has tuned in for this episode of Code and Concrete. And Robert, I am going to make sure that we have you on again in the future. Especially, I want to hear about that pilot project when you're able to reveal it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Take care.